As a young kid, Capone was expelled from school at the age of 14 for giving his teacher some hands. Boy, he said, "What's up, teacher? You want some hands?" Yurp Churp Churp. What's good, y'all? Tables in the building with another documentary video for you. I'm like, you already know the vibes, bruh. We about to get straight into the video though. Anyways, y'all, before we get into this video, I gotta tell y'all, hit that subscribe button down below, bruh. Hit the subscribe button, it's right there. Watch it pop up. Yes, sir. Subscribe to the channel. Subscribe. And like the video, comment on the video. I'm like, stop playing with me. We're gonna come up, trying to get 100 subs. Subscribe to the channel, bruh. New videos coming out soon. But anyways, we're gonna get straight into the video. So in this video, we're gonna talk about the Mafia and how they started, how they kept their power for so long, and how they were on a decline, you feel me? Anyways, let's get straight into the video. I'm like, yeah. Now, before we start, you might think you already know everything there is to know about the Mafia. I've seen Goodfellas and The Godfather, isn't it just gonna be just like that? No, sir. Those movies are played up to add that one thing all movies have to have. Drama. But anyways, the name Mafia was first used by the media and law enforcement in Sicily, Italy. Now, the Sicilian Mafia does have ties to the American Mafia, but if we got into all the backstory of the Sicilian mob too, we would be here all day. We don't have the time for that. Dang time. No, sir.
Lillard, long range three, and it's good! Lillard hit a three. Lillard with the dagger.
But anyways, let's talk about what the Mafia did and who they were. To start off, the Mafia was one of the biggest crime syndicates the United States has ever had to deal with. They had their little pasta hands in almost every crime there is. At the time the Mafia was getting into its prime was Prohibition, where the sale, distribution, and manufacturing of alcohol was prohibited. So with that, the Mafia did not care at all, bro. They said, what? Prohibition? I don't care. Get them out of my face, boy. Because they had people run distilleries, brothels, gambling operations, black market dealings, and extortion. So that brings us to the first known Sicilian Mafia member to move to the US, Giuseppe Esposito. And back in Sicily, this man was a hit man, swear to God. This man was getting straight bodies, killing politicians and wealthy landowners, so he had to end up fleeing to New Orleans. But in New Orleans in 1881, he was captured by David Hennessy and deported back to Italy. But too bad for the US officials, because the mob had already spread throughout New Orleans and New York by that time. And the Mafia was not done with his Hennessy yet. You get it?
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Anyways, on October 15th, 1890, they found Hennessy, who was at the time the superintendent and the chief of police, and murdered him. So the New Orleans police rounded up hundreds of Sicilians and accused 19 of them for Hennessy's murder. And with how slippery the Mafia can be, most of the men were acquitted, and there were a few mistrials as well. Some thought that maybe the jurors were bribed and paid off to let the men off the hook. You feel me? And on March 14th, 1891, an angry mob gathered and rioted outside the prison and ended up storming the prison and dragging out the men and killing 11 of them. And this is thought to be the largest mass lynching in the US history. And with the lynchings, the phrase Mafia became a word that the US would become quite familiar of. But let's get into some history of the two most notorious mobsters in the history of the US. First, we have Alphonse Gabriel Capone, aka Al Capone. Blah. This name is probably the one you're most familiar with because the movie Scarface was based on him. But Al Capone was an American gangster and businessman who got notoriety during Prohibition as the right-hand man and later boss of the Chicago outfit. As a young kid, Capone was expelled from school at the age of 14 for giving his teacher some hands. Boy, he said, "What's up, teacher? You want some hands?" After leaving school, he had numerous odd jobs leading up to him eventually joining the 5 Points gang in Manhattan. But he moved to Chicago because of his mentor Johnny Torrio, who was also Capone's boss. But in 1925, Torrio was shot outside his home and actually lived But with getting shot, he decided to leave Chicago and make Al Capone the new boss of the Chicago outfit. And as the boss, Al expanded the gang with a bootlegging network that eventually reached Canada. I'm like, they up there, they on the ceiling, I think. And with political and law enforcement protection, he used more violence to increase his revenue. He also had hands in gambling, racketeering, and other illicit activities. In total, all of his crime syndicates pulled around $100 million a year. And being the guy who at the time was dripped out and liked talking to reporters, he became an international celebrity. It wasn't like he was just a criminal though. He actually had numerous donations to hella different charities. But with that being said, Capone was assumed to be responsible for the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre, where after staging a fake police raid, 7 associates of criminal rivals, the Northside Gang, were gunned down in broad daylight. This heavily damaged Capone's reputation. And in 1931, Capone was charged with income tax evasion along with some other crimes. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison. He started his sentence in Atlanta Penitentiary but was later transferred to the new Alcatraz prison in August 1934. But in November 1939, due to a late stage of syphilis, he was released and entered a Baltimore hospital. Later, he retired to his Florida home where he passed from a stroke and pneumonia in 1947. Now, the second mobster we're going to go on is Charles Lucky Luciano. Lucky Luciano is probably a name that you aren't too familiar with, but he was one of the biggest names in the Mafia world. In Luciano's younger days, he would get into a lot of trouble with the law even before the age of 14. Just like Al Capone, actually. In school, he would convince his classmates to pay for protection, and if they didn't want it, he would beat them up himself. Now, you might be asking where the name Lucky comes from. But the belief is that he got this name because he escaped from and survived multiple murder attempts. And in 1929, Luciano was abducted, beaten, and stabbed by a group of men who left him for dead in Staten Island Beach. He was discovered by police and taken to the nearest hospital where he actually survived. But this attack left him with his famous features being his scarred chin and his lazy eye. Yeah, John B. Drooping, I'm not gonna lie. Luciano's rise to power started with the Big Six, which was a group of 6 men dominating the illegal East Coast liquor trade. In 1927, he was appointed to top lieutenant for Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria, head of New York's biggest crime family. But in the late 1920s, the Castello-Marise War broke out, which allowed Luciano to take control of the Genovese family and establish the commission. The Castello-Marise War was a power struggle for control over the Italian-American mafia between Joe the Boss Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano. Blows were traded for about a year where both sides got big hits, but Masseria got the worst of it, losing most of his high-profile members in the war. And Luciano grew tired of the bloodshed and the hit that their businesses were taking from the war, so he saw this as a window of opportunity and began talking to Maranzano, betraying Masseria. And in 1931, Luciano arranged to have Masseria killed following lunch at a Coney Island restaurant. Following Masseria's murder and with Maranzano's blessing, Luciano took over Masseria's former gang and became Maranzano's lieutenant. But Luciano had higher visions to replace Sicilian strong-arm methods with corporate structure, a board of directors, and systematic infiltration of legitimate enterprise. So Maranzano plans to have Luciano murdered to become the sole ruler of New York and become Capo di Tutti Capi, or boss of all bosses. But Luciano got tipped off on Maranzano's plan and decided to act first. He sent 4 Jewish gangsters to Maranzano's office, where 2 of them disarmed Maranzano's bodyguards and the other 2 stabbed Maranzano multiple times before shooting him. And with these 2 betrayals, Luciano became the unofficial leader of the New York Mafia. And as the new Capo di Tutti Capi, Luciano decided to restructure the Mafia, and in doing so, set up the commission to set up a governing body for organized crime. The commission was made to settle all disputes and decide family territories. Luciano's goal with this restructuring was to maintain power over all the families and prevent future gang wars. But this reign didn't last very long because in 1936, Luciano was arrested for running a prostitution ring, which actually wasn't his main source of income. But nonetheless, he was still convicted and sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison. But Luciano was an incredibly powerful man and has still managed to run the prison and his empire while incarcerated. And during World War II, the US government struck a secret deal with him saying that his sentence would be reduced for protection of New York Harbor, which he did. In 1946, Thomas E. Dewey and Luciano struck another deal that Luciano would be released if he agreed not to fight his deportation back to Italy, which he reluctantly agreed to, and on February 10, 1946, Luciano set sail to Italy from Brooklyn Harbor. But he really wasn't going for that, because not too long after, he secretly moved to Cuba to continue his work in the US. But the US government caught on to this and pressured Cuba to deport him back to Italy. With this, Luciano was not allowed to leave Naples, Italy, where he spent the remainder of his days. On January 26, 1962, Luciano died of a heart attack in Naples International Airport. But despite Luciano's death, he left a long-lasting legacy by restructuring the Mafia in a way that allowed it to run smoothly for decades to come. But back to the history of the entire Mafia. At the end of Prohibition, the Mafia was in their golden age, where they diversified the black market activities like loan sharking, protection rackets, and selling illegally obtained goods. So speaking of, in New York, the Mafia got so powerful that any construction projects didn't happen without the approval from one of the 5 families. And throughout the US, the mob received little to no resistance from the feds, who on one hand didn't have the resources to fight back against them or didn't even know about them at all. Head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, denied their existence. It wasn't until 1951 that the federal government brought national attention to the mob. Estes Kefauver led a committee to investigate the effect the mob had on interstate commerce. They even brought in suspected mobsters like Frank Costello to testify, but the Mafia has a code of silence that they take rather seriously. So of course they didn't get any helpful information from these cases. In 1957, New York State Police stumbled upon a meeting of Mafia leaders from all around the country in the small town of Appalachian at the home of Joseph Barbaro. And with a little yard full of fancy cars with out-of-state license plates gathered together, that raised suspicion for the local police. They detained and indicted over 60 Mafia bosses. The meeting was named the Appalachian Meeting and confirmed the existence of nationwide crime organizations and finally got the FBI's attention. And in 1963, the FBI got their first rat. No, not 6ix9ine, but close. The Mafia members usually get the same charge that he got, racketeering. But anyways, enough about 6ix9ine. In 1963, Joe Valaki became the first member to give up secrets about the inner workings of the Mafia. And with this, the FBI got a lot more aggressive, creating the Organized Crime Strike Force. And in 1970, the Ricoh Act, which stands for the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, was created, which increased the penalties for racketeering and specifically targeted mob leaders who had others commit crimes for them. But of course, once again, this didn't stop the Mafia. In the 1970s, they started betting on college sports games and tax fraud. But the Ricoh Act definitely weakened the pull of the Mafia, and by the end of the 20th century, the power of the Mafia had rapidly declined. But the Mafia is still around today, and the FBI estimates that there are about 3,000 members where they work more behind closed doors, outsourcing their work to other groups. And as long as there's money and organized crime, there will forever be groups trying to get in where they fit in. And that's why the Mafia is still around today. But anyways, y'all, hope y'all enjoyed the video. Make sure y'all subscribe to the channel, bruh. We're gonna be coming out with more documentaries. I need y'all to recommend some. If y'all can, comment down a documentary you want to see. But I'm gonna do it. Any documentary y'all want to see, I'm gonna do it. I'm probably gonna do a murder mystery after this, so stay tuned for that. But anyways, y'all, that's gonna be the end of the video. Watch out for some more videos coming. We on the grind, bruh. I swear to God, trust me. But anyways, love y'all, man. Peace.